And how about Kalissa Wing, who serves as the Department of Defense Education Activities Diversity Chief? 2020 tweet, I'm so exhausted at these white folks in these PD professional development sessions. This lady actually had the caudacity to say black people can be racist too. I had to stop the session and give Karen the business. We are not the majority, we don't have the power.
The hush of the congressional chamber is palpable as the representative from Texas rises, his gaze fixed on the director seated across from him. With the national budget at an unprecedented $6.8 trillion for the next fiscal year, the stakes couldn't be higher. As the representative begins his inquiry, the discourse unfurls, revealing a tapestry of fiscal commitments that span from climate resilience programs to international military support. Each question, meticulously crafted, peels back layers of governmental priorities, exposing a narrative of expenditure that stretches the fabric of the nation's financial resources. Amidst a backdrop of historic revenue to GDP ratios and a planned decadal expenditure that eclipses imagination, the hearing becomes more than a mere discussion. It becomes a crucible where the future fiscal trajectory of the nation is contested.
Thank the gentleman for yielding back, and now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Director Young, for joining us here today. I would note we've already acknowledged that 19.6% overall percent of GDP revenue to the Treasury, which would put it at historic highs. So I assume the Director would agree that that's a relatively high historic percentage of revenue to the Treasury.
Yeah, we would be in line with where we were in the mid-90s.
But nevertheless, those are very high levels as a relative basis of percentage of GDP, but we're also acknowledging that we're increasing spending next year to $6.8 trillion, $500 billion more than FY23. $82 trillion over 10 years. $82 trillion of spending over 10 years. But we're trying to praise a $3 trillion so-called reduction in the deficit, despite the fact we're spending $82 trillion. Here's where I want to kind of go. What are the priorities of this administration when I look at what I see in the budget? Here's some of the spending items that are brought to my attention. $3.9 billion for the Department of Homeland Security Climate Resilience Program. $3.9 billion because the administration cares about a climate crisis more than the crisis at our border. $109 million going to Mexico. Mexico for law enforcement and military support. This despite the fact that our border is overrun and Mexico has lost complete control along our southern border. $3.5 billion for the FBI's new headquarters. $3.5 billion for the FBI to have a brand new headquarters in Maryland. $1.8 billion more for the Internal Revenue Service on top of the $80 billion that was given to the IRS last year. $1.6 billion for the United Nations Green Climate Fund, which includes $100 million to go to China for greening its economy. $108 million for the World Health Organization, which conspired and colluded with the CCP to cover up COVID and parroted the CCP propaganda. I've been combing over the budget to find any reductions in outlays or cuts in this administration's budget. There are precious few. Where I could find a couple of actual reductions was, for example, in reductions to Border Patrol, reductions to ICE, actual cuts to the spending for those particular programs, but that is supposedly offset by $4.7 billion for a new Southwest Border Contingency Fund to respond to migrant surges. But here's the thing. Those are restricted, according to the language that I see. Eligible uses for the funds include soft-sided facilities, transportation detention beds, alternative detention, and shelter and services programs to organizations caring for non-citizen adults. In other words, that is additional money for more processing with cuts and reductions to the actual enforcement of the law. Those are the priorities of this administration. So one thing that I would like to have at the end of this is I would like for the OMB to produce for us a list of specific reductions in outlays throughout the president's budget.
The air in the room thickens as the conversation veers sharply towards specific budget allocations. Billions earmarked for new federal headquarters and international climate funds stand in stark contrast to the reductions in border enforcement funding. The representative's voice, firm and unyielding, cuts through the bureaucratic responses, laying bare the administration's spending choices. This moment, pivotal and revealing, serves as a microcosm of the broader fiscal debate, encapsulating the inherent tensions between global ambitions and domestic security. The scrutiny intensifies, drawing a line in the sand and challenging the Assembly to reflect on the true cost of these priorities.
I would also note that there was $114.7 million for diversity and inclusion activities at the Department of Defense. $114 million for diversity and inclusion activities. The Air Force Academy curriculum that recommended cadets avoided gendered language like mom and dad. A United States Marine Corps report that was studying whether we should use sir and ma'am for our drill instructors. A memo from the Department of Defense Secretary Austin recognizing transgender and gender nonconforming persons. $91,000 for diversity and inclusion seminars for the Air Force Band. $180,000 salary for a senior diversity official at the Air Force, which is more than a member of Congress gets paid. And how about Kalissa Wing, who serves as the Department of Defense Education Activities Diversity Chief? 2020 tweet, I'm so exhausted at these white folks in these PD professional development sessions. This lady actually had the caudacity to say black people can be racist too. I had to stop the session and give Karen the business. We are not the majority, we don't have the power. Are these the priorities of the current administration, to fund the kinds of offices that hire individuals that use this kind of divisive racist language? Is that the priorities of this president's budget? And you have criticized our plan, some conservatives in Congress plan to shrink Washington and grow America. The House Freedom Caucus plan wouldn't reduce the deficit by 1 penny. Which is it? All I've heard today from my Democratic colleagues is all the horrifying cuts that are going to occur. Which is it? Because you're going to say that we're not going to reduce the deficit when you say that we're going to stop a student loan bailout of $400 billion? You're telling me that wouldn't reduce the FY 2023 deficit? To eliminate a $400 billion bailout of student loans. That it wouldn't reduce the deficit if we were to reclaim $91 billion of unspent COVID money, or $80 billion from the IRS expansion, or $78 billion from the so-called Inflation Reduction Act's unspent climate funds, or $270 billion from the Inflation Reduction Act's so-called energy subsidies, or getting Americans back to work under SNAP or Medicaid. All of this that we proposed in the House Freedom Caucus budget would save $4.82 trillion over 10 years.
As the gavel signals the close of the hearing, the echoes of the day's discourse linger in the chamber. The representative from Texas, steadfast in his pursuit of clarity, leaves behind a series of unanswered questions that resonate with the gravity of their implications. The dialogue, though confined to the walls of the hearing room, speaks to a broader narrative of governance, accountability, and the stewardship of national resources. It beckons the audience, both within the chamber and beyond, to ponder the delicate balance between ambition and prudence, between the dreams of tomorrow and the realities of today. In this moment of reflection, the hearing transcends its procedural bounds, becoming a beacon for engaged citizenship and a reminder of the enduring power of informed debate. As the nation stands at a fiscal crossroads, the dialogue initiated here will undoubtedly shape the contours of policy and public discourse in the days to come, underscoring the indelible link between the decisions of today and the legacy of tomorrow.